It was supposed to be an ordinary Friday morning in Maplewood Estates, a fortress of groomed lawns, security gates, and flawless domesticity. Here, trouble was a rumor, a distant headline from another, less controlled city. But inside the Vance residence, a horror of absolute silence had settled. 16-year-old Elara Vance was gone. The scene was unnerving not for its violence, but for its eerie tidiness. The bed was unmade, a pillow still bearing the faint indentation of her head. Her prescription glasses lay on her nightstand, and her beloved black and white kitten, Static, slept unaware at the foot of her bed. Yet, Elara was nowhere. The parents, Mr. and Mrs. Vance, were beyond hysteria. They were paralyzed by a shock that felt appropriate for a natural disaster. The detective first on the scene, Lena Hsu, was a 42-year-old veteran whose entire career was built on the grim efficiency of identifying patterns. She was logical, deeply cynical, and ruthlessly resistant to the emotional manipulation of distraught families. Hsu surveyed the pristine room and felt the familiar knot of administrative annoyance tighten in her stomach. This, she thought, was not the chaotic scene of an abduction. There was no forced entry, no struggle, no discarded items in the hall. This was the tidy, calculated exit of a teenager making a point. Hsu didn't see a crime in progress. She saw a familiar, infuriating pattern. Code 403, Voluntary Adolescent Separation. The girl was testing her boundaries, using the fear of her parents as leverage. Detective Hsu, standing in the perfect, sunlight-drenched room, saw a moody kid seeking attention, not a missing person. And that fatal, immediate judgment would cost the investigation the single most crucial commodity in any missing persons case: time. The central tragedy of the Elara Vance case was the profound disconnect between how the victim was perceived and who she actually was, a disconnect that the system was built to exploit. The main investigator, Detective Lena Hsu, arrived with the rigid statistical certainty of a woman who had seen this scenario unfold countless times. At 42, Hsu prided herself on being data-driven. She had a 95% success rate on missing persons cases, a record achieved by quickly and correctly categorizing the majority of reports as simple juvenile rebellion. She was impatient with emotional chaos and focused only on the lack of physical evidence. Hsu surveyed the room, taking in the clues that to her confirmed her immediate suspicion. Elara Vance was 16, a sophomore whose online profile suggested the familiar cocktail of teenage angst and intense, melancholic artistry. The key contradiction, however, was where the real clues lay. Elara was known to be meticulous, almost pathologically so, due to a mild anxiety disorder that required her to take lithium medication every 12 hours. That medication sat untouched on her nightstand. Yet, Hsu saw only one thing: the teenager's perfect calculated exit. Elara had left her phone charging on the dock, the lifeline of any modern teen. To Hsu, this wasn't panic. It was deliberate evasion. She decided instantly. The victim left to make a statement. She'll be back when her phone battery dies or she misses her medication. My focus is minimizing departmental resources. Hsu's growing skepticism was fueled further by the parents, Mr. and Mrs. Vance. They were high-strung, wealthy, and deeply concerned with image, though their distress was genuine. Mr. Vance, an attorney, immediately tried to manage the detective, offering to fund extra search teams, while Mrs. Vance was hysterical, fixating on the abandoned phone. She never, ever leaves her phone. Detective, this isn't her. She's terrified. But their very desperation, their insistence that their daughter was unique and incapable of adolescent rebellion, only confirmed Hsu's bias. In her professional calculus, they were typical, controlling suburban parents in denial about their daughter's teenage phase. Amidst the emotional noise and the detective's mounting cynicism stood Detective Marcus Krell, Hsu's junior partner. Krell, 30 and less jaded, was the one quietly documenting the items Hsu ignored. He logged the specific location of the critical medication, and his gaze lingered on Elara's desk. He noticed the half-finished digital art project glowing softly on her laptop screen. a project she was due to submit that day. More crucially, he noticed the small, silver chain necklace, a cherished gift from her grandmother, draped over the corner of the monitor. Elara was known to wear that necklace every single day. Krell didn't have Hsu's confidence or her statistical authority, but he felt the sick weight of the time they were losing. He saw the contradictions screaming that the girl's soul, the true, meticulous Elara, had not walked out the front door. His gut told him this was not a runaway. It was a ghost of a crime, and his senior partner was determined to treat it as a routine administrative burden. The first 72 hours of the Elara Vance case became a grim procedural dance, completely dictated by Hsu's immovable belief in the runaway theory, despite the mounting evidence of contradiction. Hsu's first step was to validate her bias using Elara's digital life. Her team pulled Elara's social media history, focusing on the inevitable signs of teenage disaffection. The search revealed precisely what Hsu expected: several posts over the last month that contained vague, moody pronouncements. One post, an elaborate digital painting, carried the caption, "Sometimes the only way out is through the vanishing point." This artistic, dramatic flourish, combined with her recent search history, which included queries like "How far can a bus go on $100?" and "Remote coastal towns, California," was all the justification Hsu required. It's textbook Krell, Hsu announced to her partner back at the precinct, tapping the printout of the search history with a sharp fingernail. She was researching an exit strategy. Teenagers are dramatic. They leave their meds to prove a point about how much control they have. The phone is here because she doesn't want us to track her, and the absence of struggle is because she walked out the front door on her own 2 feet. Krell tried to argue the small, intimate details, the ones that screamed unwillingness. Detective, she left her necklace. That silver chain. She hasn't missed a day of that medication in 2 years, according to her primary care physician. And look at this laptop. The art project is half finished. A true runaway would delete her online tracks and finish her commitments. This isn't someone planning to leave forever. This is someone who is planning to finish her project tonight. Hsu scoffed, waving a hand dismissively, her patience dangerously thin. Krell, a runaway who plans, will often stage contradictions to throw us off the scent. It's common for them to leave a note saying, "I'll be back," while they're already on a bus. She's 18 months from 18. She's flexing her independence. We notify the bus companies and put out a low-level alert. We do not mobilize dive teams for a kid who just wanted to see the ocean. We follow the data. The conflict with the Vance family grew toxic and public. Mr. Vance, using his legal connections, began applying pressure, demanding to see search warrants and official logs, even threatening to sue the precinct for negligence. "You're looking for a kid who ran away from homework," Mr. Vance shouted during a tense, unscheduled meeting in the precinct lobby. His face was blotchy with rage and fear. "My daughter is bipolar. She needs her medication. This is an immediate medical emergency." Hsu remained terrifyingly calm, planting her hands flat on the desk, her expression unmoving. "Mr. Vance, your daughter searched for bus routes 2 days ago. She posted about vanishing online. We are following the evidence that she provided us. We are doing the appropriate level of investigation for a statistically probable runaway. Your hysteria is understandable, but it is not evidence." Hsu saw the Vances not as collaborators, but as obstacles, parents whose denial was complicating a simple closure. Her focus was on statistics, not intuition. The escalating tension reached a breaking point when the department received a false sighting report. A gas station attendant 300 miles away claimed a girl matching Elara's description. Purple hair, small build, had bought a soda. Hsu used this unconfirmed, distant report as definitive proof of her theory. "See, Krell," Hsu said, her voice laced with triumph, though her eyes were exhausted. "She's on the road. This is solved. This is how these cases always work. Now we wait for the eventual, tearful call from a highway patrol station when she runs out of money and realizes being homeless is less fun than being grounded." Krell felt a sick, cold certainty that they were all fundamentally wrong. The false sighting was too easy, too convenient, and too far from the details he trusted. He couldn't shake the image of the necklace and the half-finished art. He knew, despite Hsu's data, that they were losing precious, life-saving time. He stopped arguing with Hsu, realizing his pleas were falling on deaf ears. He continued his own quiet investigation, compiling every discarded detail into a separate file. By the start of the second week, the case had flatlined. Hsu's team was focused on paperwork, officially preparing the documentation to close the missing person file as a voluntary departure. The Vances had started hiring expensive private investigators, fueling the town's suspicion that they were covering up a darker domestic issue. Elara Vance was just another statistic in a file drawer labeled inactive, pending resolution. 2 weeks had passed since Elara Vance walked out of her suburban home. 2 weeks of procedural negligence. 2 weeks of a runaway theory that was about to shatter into a horrific truth. Detective Krell, driven by a guilt that had now festered into a constant, cold ache, refused to let the file go cold. He returned to the Vance house alone, using the pretext of double-checking for secondary exits. He was no longer looking for signs of break-in. He was looking for something Elara wanted them to find, a message only someone who ignored the loud, obvious clues would ever discover. He spent hours in her room, ignoring the messy clothes and the standard teenage clutter. He focused on the structural elements Hsu had dismissed. He noticed something off about a loose floorboard beneath a heavy and used chest of drawers, a section of 1950s-era oak that looked subtly newer, subtly smoother. Krell struggled with the heavy chest, his muscles straining against the weight of the furniture and the unbearable weight of the investigation. He pried the floorboard loose. Beneath it, wrapped tightly in a plastic bag to shield it from moisture and dust, was not a hidden wallet or cash, the typical runaway stash, but a small, black spiral-bound notebook. It was Elara's private diary, the one she had previously insisted she destroyed years ago, the existence of which her parents had been unaware. Krell took the diary back to the precinct and drove straight to an empty conference room. He was afraid to open it, knowing this book contained the truth that would confirm their catastrophic failure. He opened it to the very last, hastily scrawled entry. It was dated the night of her disappearance. The entry began normally, a melancholic reflection on her latest art class, before fracturing into desperate terror. "I hate him. I hate the way he looks at me when I'm drawing. He said he'd only teach me advanced composition, but he keeps asking about Mom's schedule, about when Dad is out of town. He knows I'm anxious. He knows I rely on a routine. He told me the other day, 'You are exactly where I want you to be.'" Then, the final, chilling lines scrawled in near-illegible handwriting, the ink smeared by what Krell realized must have been a tear or a drop of sweat. He saw the sketch. "He knows I know. I have to go now. He said if I scream, Stat will disappear. Don't look for the bus. Look for the moth in the tower. It's the only code I have left. The tower is always watching." Krell slammed the diary shut, his breath hitching, the room spinning with the enormity of the lie they had embraced for 2 weeks. Elara hadn't run away from her parents. She had been intercepted by someone she knew and trusted, someone who knew the house, her routine, her medication schedule, and her deepest anxiety, the safety of her kitten, Static. The runaway clues, the search history, the cryptic online post, had been a perfectly executed, staged misdirection by the predator himself, exploiting the known patterns of teenage flight that Hsu herself relied on. The final coded entry, the chilling instruction to ignore the bus routes and seek the moth in the tower, was the lifeline. Elara had tried to warn them, and they had spent 2 weeks categorizing her warning as a sulk. Krell rose from his chair, adrenaline overcoming 2 weeks of exhaustion. He walked straight into Hsu's office, the spiral notebook heavy in his hand, throwing it onto her desk, stopping the bureaucratic pen stroke that would have sealed the case forever. "Hsu," Krell said, his voice quiet, controlled, and utterly lethal. "Read the last entry, then look at the timeline again. We've been looking for a teenage runaway, when we should have been looking for an adult predator who knew exactly how to make her walk out the front door without a fight. We are 2 weeks late, and that time belongs to him. The confession of failure was silent, written on Hsu's face as she read the final, coded message. Her cynicism vaporized, replaced by a cold, searing panic. The reality of the predator's calculated patience, a patience that had been mirrored and rewarded by the police department's own arrogance, was devastating. "The moth in the tower," Hsu whispered, her voice rough. She slammed her fist on the desk, shame momentarily overwhelming protocol. "It's a local architectural landmark. The old abandoned Maplewood Water Tower, the one with the massive graffiti moth on the side. The place kids dare each other to visit. He's been using it as an observation post." The entire departmental machinery, once sluggish and skeptical, now mobilized with ruthless efficiency. Hsu led the task force, her movements sharp, her focus absolute. The police now raced to catch up to a crime that had a 2-week head start. The first step was to identify the predator. The diary mentioned advanced composition and a level of access that suggested a tutor or associate. A quick check of the Vance's recent expenses revealed the identity of the private art tutor, a quiet man in his early 30s named Adrian Finch, who had been dismissed by Mrs. Vance just a week before Elara went missing after his behavior became subtly controlling. A background check on Adrian Finch revealed a history of minor stalking complaints in other cities, always involving artistic teenagers. Finch, the predator, had used the guise of mentorship to gain trust and access to the Vance home, timing his final move for the moment the parents were focused on their legal issues and the detective was focused on her statistics. Hsu's team converged on the Maplewood Water Tower, a dilapidated metal structure overlooking the entire suburban community. The symbolism was clear. The predator had been watching Elara's every move from this elevated, hidden perch. Hsu's team breached the chained access gate, moving with a desperate, heavy silence. Inside the damp, echoing concrete base, they found definite signs of recent occupation. A sleeping bag, empty containers of Elara's preferred brand of herbal tea, and a makeshift desk. The predator had indeed used the abandoned tower as his temporary lair, but Elara was not there. They found 2 major clues. First, tucked beneath a section of torn canvas, was Elara's missing silver necklace. It was carefully laid out, almost like an offering. Second, pinned to the center of a large, freshly drawn charcoal sketch was a single, disturbing item, a Polaroid photo of Elara. She was awake, but her eyes were glazed, and she was clearly sedated. She was wearing a different set of clothes, and the background was not the tower, but the inside of a cramped, metallic space, like the back of a moving truck or an isolated cargo container. The sketch itself was an amateur portrait of a girl sitting quietly, but the style was horrifying. It was drawn in Adrian Finch's identifiable, overly classical style. The caption beneath the drawing, written in Finch's ornate, precise hand, was the final, devastating piece of evidence. "The vanishing point has shifted, Detective. You look for the sea, but I was building a stage. You gave me 2 weeks. The performance is just beginning." Hsu stood in the concrete base, staring at the Polaroid of the drug girl and the taunting message. They had deciphered Elara's code, but they were hours, perhaps days, too late. Adrian Finch had used the 2 weeks the police had gifted him to establish a sanctuary, realize he was compromised, and move Elara to his final, unknown destination. The moth in the tower was merely the first scene of a much longer, darker play. Detective Lena Hsu had spent 2 weeks failing to see the truth right in front of her. Now, standing in the cold, dusty hideout of a meticulous predator, she saw the full horror of her mistake. Adrian Finch's true weapon was not a gun or a knife, but the statistical probability of bureaucratic failure. He knew the police would chase the obvious, leaving him the 2-week head start he needed to prepare his final, horrific masterpiece. The question now was no longer who had taken Elara Vance, but where was she being shipped to be used as the subject of his art? And could the police, humbled by their catastrophic error, possibly move fast enough to stop the curtain from closing forever on a girl who was hidden somewhere in a metallic box, already traveling across state lines? This was Trace Crime Files. Subscribe for more stories where truth is stranger than fiction, and justice is never as simple as it seems.